Imagine Europe at the dawn of the 18th century. The vast Spanish Empire, which had once ruled half the world, suddenly collapses after the death of the last Habsburg king without an heir. A vacant throne, sprawling colonies in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, and every great power eager to place the crown of Madrid upon its own head. France wanted the grandson of Louis XIV to inherit, so that a dual Bourbon monarchy could strangle the continent. Austria cried out that it was the rightful heir, preparing for war to defend its influence. Britain and the Dutch Republic feared the nightmare of a Franco-Spanish union, which could smother their trade and reshape the face of the world. In a single moment, the will of a dying monarch became the spark that ignited a continent-wide war, spreading from the fields of Germany to the plains of Italy, from the fortresses of Catalonia to faraway colonies. Bloody battles shook Europe, and great commanders such as the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy altered the course of history with decisive victories, while new boundaries for the world order were drawn. This was not just a war for a crown, but a struggle to decide who would rule Europe and who would control its trade routes and oceans. It was the War of the Spanish Succession, one of the greatest and most complex conflicts that shaped the modern world. A tale of grand alliances, stunning victories, crushing defeats, and peace treaties that redistributed power, paving the way for Britain's rise as an unbeatable maritime empire and signaling the decline of Spain as a global power. The death of King Charles II of Spain in November 1700 was the pivotal event that lit the fuse. Charles was the last direct descendant of the Spanish Habsburgs, a dynasty that had ruled Spain since the 16th century, linking the fates of Madrid and Vienna for generations. But his tragedy lay not only in his death, but in his life. Physically frail and mentally weak, an outcome of centuries of intermarriage among the Habsburgs, his reign was marked by political paralysis and military decline. Charles II left behind a vast empire stretching from the Low Countries, Naples, and Sicily in Europe to the immense colonies of the Americas and the Philippines. This empire was a glittering prize for Europe's ruling houses. Without a direct heir, the succession opened the gates to fierce rivalries, especially between the Bourbons of France and the Habsburgs of Austria. Everyone understood that inheriting this crown meant acquiring unmatched political, economic, and strategic weight. Louis XIV of France held the strongest position. Through marriage ties, he secured claims for his son and grandson to the Spanish throne. Austria, however, refused to see Spain slip from its grasp. For England and the Dutch, a Franco-Spanish union meant a terrifying superpower that could dominate Europe's trade and balance of power. By a controversial will, Charles II designated Philip, Duke of Anjou, the grandson of Louis XIV, as his sole heir. This decision detonated a diplomatic crisis. Europe saw Spain on the verge of falling under French domination, a prospect intolerable to the continental balance of power. Charles's death, therefore, was not merely the end of a weak monarch. It was the beginning of a bloody conflict that would redraw the map of Europe. The path to war was not the result of a single decision, but of accumulated rivalries. Charles's will was simply the final straw. Soon the Grand Alliance of Austria, England, and the Dutch Republic was formed to resist France and Bourbon Spain. Everyone knew the coming war would not be a family quarrel, but a continental conflict, shaping Europe for decades to come. The war began in 1701, as diplomatic tensions exploded into open fighting. Spain, the Italian principalities, and the Low Countries became the central theaters where French and Allied forces clashed against the Grand Alliance, Austria, England, the Dutch, Portugal, and Savoy.
At first, the struggle swayed back and forth, but soon military genius tipped the scales. Among the most brilliant commanders were John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, and Prince Eugene of Savoy. Together, they became France's nightmare. In 1704, they won a stunning victory at the Battle of Blenheim in Germany, shattering Franco-Bavarian forces, saving Vienna from collapse, and halting France's advance into the heart of Europe. This was a turning point, proving that France was not invincible. In 1706, France suffered another defeat at the Battle of Ramillies, allowing the alliance to seize most of the Spanish Netherlands. In Italy, Prince Eugene broke the French siege of Turin, forcing them to retreat and shifting the balance in the peninsula. Despite these losses, France and Spain fought on fiercely. Yet the alliance was also drained by the immense costs of war. In 1708 came another victory at Oudenarde, followed by the horrific Battle of Malplaquet in 1709, one of the bloodiest battles of the 18th century. Though the alliance technically triumphed, the staggering casualties forced England and the Dutch to consider peace. In Spain itself, the war split the kingdom. Supporters of Philip V clashed with those of Archduke Charles. Catalonia, Valencia, and Aragon resisted Bourbon rule, while Castile remained loyal to Philip. The Siege of Barcelona, 1705 to 1714, turned the city into a symbol of Catalan resistance against Philip V.
When Emperor Joseph I of Austria died in 1711, Archduke Charles became Emperor Charles VI. Suddenly, England and the Dutch feared that victory for the alliance would unite the crowns of Spain and Austria, recreating the very superpower they had sought to prevent in France. Exhausted, the great powers began to negotiate. The war ended after more than a decade of conflict, with peace treaties signed between 1713 and 1714. The most important was the Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, in which France and Spain on one side, and Britain, the Dutch, Portugal, and Savoy on the other, settled terms. Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, was recognized as the legitimate king of Spain, but only on condition that he and his heirs forever renounce any claim to the French throne. This clause was crucial. It prevented France and Spain from ever uniting under one crown, preserving the European balance. Britain emerged as the greatest victor. It gained Gibraltar and Minorca, securing strategic positions in the Mediterranean. It also obtained the Asiento, the lucrative monopoly on supplying African slaves to Spanish America, an economic prize that propelled Britain toward global dominance. Austria claimed the Spanish Netherlands, modern Belgium, Naples, Milan, and Sardinia, expanding Habsburg influence in Italy and Central Europe. The Dutch obtained defensive fortresses to protect their borders from France, while Savoy was rewarded with Sicily, later exchanged for Sardinia, setting it on the path toward becoming a rising regional power. Though Utrecht settled much, Austria and France only formally concluded hostilities with the Treaty of Reshaped in 1714, confirming the new balance of power. In Spain, resistance lingered until Barcelona fell in September 1714, marking the war's true end. The consequences were profound. Spain remained united under the Bourbons, but lost its status as a great power. France, though battered, secured Bourbon rule in Madrid. Austria became dominant in Central Europe. Britain emerged as the greatest victor. It gains Gibraltar and Minorca, securing strategic positions in the Mediterranean. It also obtained the Asiento, the lucrative monopoly on supplying African slaves to Spanish America, an economic prize that propelled Britain toward global dominance. The war marked the beginning of a new European system where wars were no longer dynastic quarrels alone, but strategic struggles over trade, colonies, and global balance. It entrenched the principle of the balance of power, a foundation of European politics, through the Congress of Vienna in 1815. In the long term, the War of the Spanish Succession paved the way for the colonial rivalry between Britain and France, especially in North America and India.
This rivalry, foreshadowed at Utrecht, would explode in later conflicts such as the 7 Years' War, ultimately shifting global supremacy from France to Britain. In short, the War of the Spanish Succession was the bridge between the fading world of the Spanish Habsburgs and the rise of a new order led by Britain. It was the true beginning of Europe's balance of power system.